Hello and welcome everyone to this week's episode of the Framework Podcast. And I'm going to be joined here by somebody who I've got the opportunity to know a little bit better over the last couple of years, Dr. Daniel Crosby, who I think was the first person I reached out to when I said, hey, I want to do a behavioral March Madness week. So Daniel, really excited to have you on and learn a little bit about your story and share that with all the listeners.
Yeah, Jamie, thanks for having me.
So the first part is just, give us the 30 seconds of kind of who you are, what you do today, and then we'll go through your story. But sometimes it's just nice to frame up who we're actually talking to in case somebody doesn't know you. But we'll
Seems hard to imagine. No, so I'm Daniel Crosby. I'm the Chief Behavioral Officer at Orion. What I do is I help people make better decisions with money. And I study the intersection of money, mind, and meaning, and try and help people get more money, get more meaning out of the money they do have, and be mindful about how they spend and invest it. So that's me in a nutshell.
Well, I would imagine there's not very many people that would say they don't want any of those things, right? Like, because anyway, the people usually are saying, I want to be less mindful and have less money.
Yeah. Certainly, at least the money and the meaning people are signed up for. Mindfulness is a little trickier. There's a little work involved there. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
tough.
Well, I've got two icebreakers that I usually start off with. So the first one is food. So I'd love to hear, whatever is your favorite meal, what you would have as your last meal, your favorite type of cuisine, what you're making, restaurant. It really doesn't matter. It's an open question. So what first comes to your mind when you think about food?
Yeah, so I'm a Southerner and grew up in Alabama, live in Atlanta currently. And so my last meal is definitely going to involve pecan pie. It's probably going to involve cheese grits. There may be some fried okra. There may be some blackened catfish. It's going to be very sort of light brown. The whole meal is going to be kind of light brown. It's going to be very bad for you, but very tasty.
Yeah, just one solid light brown,
Yeah.
semi-fried.
just just sort of a crispy breaded vibe to the whole operation. Yes.
Oh, very nice. Yeah, I don't think I've had the pie in a long time. So I went to school outside Charlotte, and we would get that there too, but it's been a while. Do you make it yourself, or do you have a favorite place to go to order, pick up?
So this is embarrassing, but I just made my first pecan pie of my life this last Thanksgiving. So, growing up, my mom was a great cook. And so that's where I learned to love it. And then my wife is a great cook. And that's always been, I mean, pecan pie will kill you if you eat it more than about once a year. So I try not to eat it more than about once or twice a year. So usually it's something special that like my wife would make me for my birthday or something. But this year I made one and I got to say it turned out great. So a dangerous new talent to have.
Are you also a big fan of pralines? Because they're pretty popular down in that area too. So
Yeah. Anything with butter, nuts, and brown sugar, I'm in. That's sort of my favorite flavor combo.
very nice. And for the listeners, you've got on this wonderful green, you say cardigan on here, and we are, at least releasing this during week of St. Patrick's Day. So you're a Southern Irishman, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. There's actually a lot of us. I mean, if you think about Gone with the Wind, right? O'Hara. I
Mhm.
mean, there's actually a lot of Irish folks in the Southeast, and places like Savannah have an enormous, I think second only to New York City, is the Savannah uh, uh, St. Patrick's Day parade. So yes, shout out to St. Patrick's Day. And look, I'm a shrink at heart. I love all the trappings of psychology. I've got ink blots all over my house and phrenology heads and an extensive cardigan collection. So I'm definitely dressing the type and acting the type.
Yeah. What the next kind of question that comes up, and this one's very much more tied to the interview here today, but I've been asking the people who come on the show to tell me about their own first money memory. So I would also love to hear yours. I mean, I'm sure that's a question you've asked a countless number of people now, and I'd love to hear your story too.
Yeah, so my dad is actually still a financial advisor. So my dad got his job on the day that I was born. He had dropped out of his MBA program. He was mowing yards. My mom was kind of wondering what she had gotten herself into, I believe, as was my grandmother wondering about her new son-in-law. So my dad drops out of school. He gets a job as a financial advisor, and he's been a successful advisor these many years. And so I grew up talking about money. So my very first money memories, first of all, my dad had this incredible drive to pay off our house. He wanted to pay off our house. In the home I grew up in, debt was literally a four-letter word. Like I'm not joking. My dad would not let us say the word debt any more than he would let us say a swear word. And we did nothing. We took no vacations. We never went out to eat. I mean, and it was like all eyes on the prize of getting that house paid off. So from a very young age, it's like, why are we having tuna casserole again? Because dad wants to pay off the house. So those are my very first money memories are all around my dad's sort of fanatical drive to get us out of debt.
And so I guess the next question is when/if dad paid off the house.
Yeah, he paid it off when he was 35. So I mean, that's pretty that's pretty impressive. So all the beans, all the beanie weenies and canned tuna and spam paid off.
Yeah. Did behavior change after that, or was that just kind of built in at that point?
No, I mean, he's a frugal guy. He's a frugal guy through and through. But it's interesting. And now he's actually given me different advice. He's said that was a mistake, because now my mom has health problems. They have, then they had their health, but not much money. Now they have, more money, but not as much ability. And so he said, look, go a little easier than I did. Don't be so sort of driven. Take it in stride, do a good mix of, spending money on making memories and being responsible with your money.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good lesson you kind of learn in a lot of areas, right? It's probably some balance to things is typically good, right? That if you kind of oversteer in any direction, you can kind of, not necessarily run into problems, but maybe look back and say, as your dad did, hey, maybe we should have taken a little bit lighter. Maybe at 42, it would have been okay to pay off a mortgage too.
Right. Yep.
So then has that, do you mind do you have a mortgage? Did you take one out, or have you just avoided debt completely?
I don't have a mortgage. My house is paid off. So even with 2.5% interest rates on a house, I do not have a mortgage. So my dad's lesson stuck.
Yeah, there you go. So the other thing, I've asked you before on I think a webinar before, but you've got your guitars always nicely placed behind. So for listeners, you want to tell them anything about those?
So I have played guitar since I was about 16 years old. I was in a band when I was 16 called Society's Hemorrhoid. This was the name of the punk band I was in when I was 16 years old, and I had fire truck red hair, and I wore a Rancid t-shirt every day of my life. So I've been a sort of a sloppy guitar player ever since I was 16. I'm being more intentional about it since the pandemic started. I'm practicing every night. My wife plays piano and bass, and so we put the kids down and we have a little jam session. So it's a lot of fun. It's one of the things that's keeping me sane during this strange time.
Yeah. And did that come about immediately during kind of COVID times, or was it a little bit later in? Just when did you kind of decide to be a little bit more intentional about it?
It was a little bit later in, because I think early on we were like, like this is a 2-week thing or a 1-month thing. And I mean, if you hearken back to those days, I mean, there were a couple of weeks where we were sitting at the kitchen table every night, like where are we going to get enough meat, and like, where are we going to get adequate toilet paper, and what is this thing? So I think it's once we got over the immediate fear, but we're still pretty locked down, that we were able to transition to trying to make something of it. For whatever reason, I'm usually a voracious reader. I've had the hardest time reading ever since this started. I just kind of feel tired all the time. And so guitar is one of those things. Guitar is one of those things that's like, different, and it kind of keeps you up, but it allows you to feel like you did something as well.
Yeah, it's just because I've brought back my bass playing, and I've been playing almost every day now for, I don't know, 4 or 5 months. And it's a similar thing. Like, I was a very big writer, and that was very therapeutic to me before pandemic. And then lately, that's not working. And my writings dropped back tremendously, and I've shifted to playing bass kind of on free time. And I think probably some of that's true. Like, I'm just tired of sitting in front of a computer and writing, even though I used to love it. And even just thinking about things to write about, that's kind of all faded away. And like, I don't want to think like that now. So I've gone back to bass playing. And just this last week, I finally got my drum machine set back up. So now I'm doing loops with that and the bass, which I realized was really important. I think I stalled out here on bass again and need to actually play along with something. So that was a good change too.
Yeah.
What style of music do you like nowadays? You still listen to your Rancid?
So, I mean, I still do listen to that stuff if I'm working out mostly. I mean, look, I wear green cardigans. I'm not as punk rock as I used to be, but my favorite band of all time is Radiohead. I met my wife over a shared love of Radiohead, so that's sort of always a special band for us. And Arcade Fire, Radiohead, Bjork. I'm sort of, like a lot of people, I'm sort of trapped in, I'm frozen in amber at the time that sort of, my music taste sort of crystallized 10 or 15 years ago, and haven't changed a lot since then, but still love some of those sort of alternative indie type bands.
What's your favorite Radiohead song and or album?
OK Computer is definitely my favorite album, and I'm going to say Exit Music for a Film is my favorite song.
Okay, very nice. So let's see. So yeah, I mean, it's a nice thing to always hear about somebody's musical taste too, because you know if you have anything to relate to that's unattached to work or any other beliefs.
Okay,
Like,
but what about you? What are you listening to? What are you playing?
so what I am listening to now has changed dramatically. So I listen to two stations, and I listen to Pandora, which I know like everyone else has like moved on to different things. But I use Pandora. I've been using it for a long time. And I actually listen to the Dave Matthews station, and I listen to a French cooking station. And it's like French cooking music. So it's all like kind of probably, I guess it's 60s ish French jazz style music, which is
Yeah.
really soothing and I like a lot. I have no idea. Like, I didn't take French, so I have no idea if there is singing. It's only about, I'd say, a third of those songs actually have vocals, though. So it's a lot of kind of background. But funny enough, like, I used to really dislike Dave Matthews, and I don't think I disliked the music. I think that I disliked the like culture around it. Whereas I grew up playing in a band, but we were all like metal guys, and like, but when I say metal, at that time it was more like early 80s metal, so Dio and that type of stuff, instead of like what you think about metal being today. A little different, but so like that, those two groups didn't mesh very well. Like the metal group and the fans of Dave Matthews with their acoustic guitars back in the 90s were very far apart. And so, but that's become much more like soothing to me. I don't listen to much metal anymore. However, my bass playing, I still more play in a metal style. So, I do play through like a pedal sometimes to add some, Just reverb, stuff like that. And I do play with a pick a lot still too on bass. So that's kind of what I listen to. But my favorite bands would be like Iron Maiden is one of my favorite bands of all time. Ronnie James Dio was my favorite singer. But then my favorite guitar player is actually Mark Knopfler from the Dire Straits. So he is by far and away, love the sound. And there's a song called Single Handed Sailor, which I've been listening to a lot during COVID times. I don't know why, but that one's been very appealing to me. It's got a very tight intro to it. So
Very cool. I'll check it out. Phoebe Bridgers was my album of the year last year. So check that out. Not very metal, but very mellow and good for zoning out in your house for a year.
yeah. Yeah, the metal in my house just it doesn't feel the same anymore, right? Like get all amped up and I don't leave this room.
That's right. Yeah.
So let's go kind of through your story and journey a little bit. So we did at least hear about the you know, America's greatest hemorrhoid band back in the back in the day. And you know, I guess you chose not to pursue that as a career, or it chose not to pursue you.
Yeah, our song "Jenny's Got Hemorrhoids" wasn't the hit that we thought it was going to be,
Yeah.
and so I was forced to become a doctor of psychology. So I actually went undergrad, went to school thinking that I would do what my dad did, you know, thinking that I would be a financial advisor, that I would work in finance. Saw that he, you know, made good money, had a good quality of life. And my freshman year, when I was taking my general ed classes, I took a bunch of psychology courses, and I just absolutely fell in love. So after that, I went on after my freshman year, I went on a 2-year mission for my church to the Philippines. And so in the Philippines, you know, I'm teaching English, I'm doing service, I'm, you know, cleaning up and building schoolhouses, and just having really good like interactions with people, and seeing how people work and seeing how different cultures coincide. And I came back from that experience sort of with a redoubled interest in pursuing psychology instead of finance. Well, fast forward to, you know, the second or third year of my PhD program in psychology. I was studying to be a clinical psychologist, and I was just totally burned out. I was just, you know, I was working with people who had done horrible things. Like I had a lot, like, you know, sort of court appointed clients, and I won't go into it too much, but like, you know, just like a rough crowd in some cases. And I was completely burned out. I was taking it home with me. It was like just hard to get excited about going to work. And so it was at that point that I started looking for non-medical, non-clinical applications of psychology. And, you know, my dad, who I turned to as sort of a sounding board for this career pivot, was like, hey, there's tons of psychology in financial markets. And I was like, what are you talking about? You know, like, I'm a psychologist. What you do is, you know, numbers and analytics. And, you know, of course, that's not true. So, you know, went through this whole process of figuring out how much psychology there was in the world of business and finance. Started my career at a consulting firm to a large bank here in the Southeast. So I would do pre-employment assessments of executive talent. So I would do like IQ tests, personality tests, goodness of fit type stuff. And it was there that I discovered behavioral economics and said, you know, look, there's no one doing this for people like my dad. Like there's great research up in the ivory tower, but, you know, this is 12 years ago. There's no one taking this and translating it for financial advisors in middle America. And so that was sort of my vision at the time. And that's what I've done ever since.
Well, so you kind of mentioned when you were doing more of the kind of clinical side and court appointed, you know, clients. I mean, what was it that was kind of burning you out from that? Was it really just like mentally some of the behaviors that you were having to deal with on that side, or, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was two things. I think one thing was just being exposed to uh, a side of humanity that I didn't love working with every day. Sort of like in some cases, in limited cases, like unrepentant criminals who had done horrible things. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to spend my whole life talking to people who have hurt kids, because a
Yeah.
judge told me I had to, and or because they had to come see me. And then, the other thing was just in some cases, I really loved my clients. I really saw myself in my clients. I really connected with my clients. But, the things that they were going through, and, not, seeing them on a Friday and not knowing if they would be around on a Monday, like, I mean, it's really important work. It's giving to mental health organizations is almost the entirety of my charitable giving. I think it's important work. I'm glad there's people that do it. I was too soft. I was not like I could not swing it. I needed to apply my love of psychology to a place that was a little easier to turn off when you walk through the door at night.
Yeah. When you made that switch, as you kind of walked through it, do you remember reading? Like, was there a seminal thing that you read or looked at that also kind of said, you know what, that probably does make sense for me to be in this space? Because you said you started looking at it, but do you remember reading, like, was it something by like Richard Thaler, and you were like, hey, that was impactful. I get it now. Like, there is space for me here.
Yeah, the Thaler stuff, Kahneman stuff, Ariely stuff was sort of my early exposure to behavioral science, behavioral finance. And that's when, I'll never forget doing my first event for a large insurance company. A large insurance company was my first client, the first person that ever hired me to, speak to a group of advisors. And people came up to me afterwards and were like, behavioral economics, like, is this a thing? Like, is this real? I've never heard of this. And you never get that anymore, right? And this is just 10 or 11
Yep.
years ago. And so the research had been around for a while, but it hadn't trickled down, like I said, to sort of everyday folks, as you know. And so it was really exciting to be able to take the work these really smart folks had done and make it serve a practical end for people like my dad.
Yeah, and I think I've mentioned this to you before, and I think where we are in, like, kind of at least like the mass culture in the United States, and I can't speak for the whole world because I don't spend enough time there, but it does seem that in the U.S. we've moved to what I say like awareness phase of behavioral economics, that we're like aware that it exists, but I think that's about about as far today as most people have gotten. And now we're right on this edge of, can we take some of this research that's been around, as you said, now for many decades? We've now become aware of it in more of a mass aspect. So there seems to be acceptance that we can now like build products and consumer experiences and strategies and communication around it. And we seem to be entering that kind of next phase, which is probably more aligned with what you're actually doing today, right? So um, yeah, I'd love to. I mean, obviously your job's shifted a little bit, but kind of what are you doing today? And because I know that does tie to that piece.
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing that's so exciting about my job today, was with Brinker Capital, who recently merged with Orion, and so now I serve, both organizations. And the exciting thing is just what you talked about. For so long, sort of the only arrow in our quiver was education. Like, we could teach people about these things, and that's effective up to a point, but it's really pretty limited. When you look at studies of behavior change, education is a really, really weak predictor of behavior change. My favorite example is the nutrition labels on food. In the early 90s, the US government starts putting nutrition labels on food. So now we know exactly what, we're getting every time we make a food purchase. And, we're still eating pecan pie. And since then, we're twice as fat and 3 times as morbidly obese as a country since they started educating us about what we put in our bodies. And it's not because anyone had any misgivings about whether or not a banana was better for you than a candy bar, like, right? I mean, we knew which was better for us. We just, it's hard to make the right decision in a moment of strong emotion. And so what I'm doing now, a lot of what I'm doing is looking at all of Orion's fintech products and baking behavior into it. How can we design the user experience such that they are induced to make we lead that horse to water to help them make the best possible behavioral decision.
Yeah, a lot of the research in this space, and you are aware of it too, right? There's a lot of analogies around food, right? A lot of behavior studies have been around eating and food. And I always used to make the joke too when I would see that. I was like, I think it's because professors are notoriously frugal and cheap also, and they take home all the leftover food from any study. The faculty meetings, just clear out any free food there. But talking about the kind of nutrition piece, I remember hearing, and I'm not sure if I actually read any of this, but I remember hearing in a presentation they talked about, when we moved from that to also adding calories behind food items at like menus in certain areas, right? Not across the country, but a lot of the Northeast, Philadelphia, where I am, and other cities started to add that. And I remember seeing something that said that had very little impact, right? Like it really didn't change people's buying much. And then I saw a presentation that said, however, if they flipped it to the left side, it did have a more significant impact, right? That if it was
people look at it.
Yeah, that if people actually looked at it first versus when they looked at, the calories second, that once you saw, right, oh, pecan pie, I'm getting this. But if you saw first thing, calorie count or price, which is also the argument of why price has always been on the flip side of the way you read. And so price will switch in other countries based on like which direction you read too. So it seems that price doesn't have a huge impact on your buying either for restaurants. But if you move it to the other side, it does start changing people's, buying. So,
so I wasn't familiar with the research about the left and right side, but I am familiar with the research on the calorie counts. And they found, at least in the initial research, that when calorie counts were there, people ate 6 more calories, which is nothing effective,
yeah.
no difference. 6 calories more when the calorie information was there. So not doing a whole lot.
Yeah, 6 is essentially 0 calorie level, right? So,
right.
that's really interesting. So, I think the next part is, when you start thinking kind of about where this world is today, of behavioral finance and behavioral economics, do you think that there are going to be kind of fundamental changes? And the reason I'm bringing this up is when you think about some of the stuff that happened in January, I guess, January into February, with GameStop and these, kind of the mobilization across social to change behavior too is pretty interesting. And do you think that's going to have like really long-term impacts on this space and how we're dealing with behavior? Because probably every single advisor out there had clients come in and ask them about this, right? Basically after, right, a Reddit post. So it's a really interesting kind of dynamic occurring.
Well, what you're talking about is sort of the inverse of what I'm trying to do. Look, we have trading has now become free, right? Robinhood was sort of the first mover there. They made trading free, then everyone else had to follow suit. Well, Robinhood gamified the experience of trading and investing. They make it easy. They give you a free stock when you sign up, and that we we just think about free differently. Like, the way people behave when something's free versus when it costs a penny is, dramatic in ways that aren't rational. So they had confetti fly down. You could see what other people were doing. Like, so they did all these things, and others followed suit. It's not just them. They did all these things to sort of gamify and make trading and investing entertaining, right? So that was in place. You pair that with a lockdown where people are bored to death. For a lot of that, there was no sports. You couldn't go anywhere. People are lonely as can be. Like, I mean, they're looking for connection. They're short on money. Many of them have lost their jobs, so they're trying to kind of double down and take some risk to get there. So I think what you saw with GameStop and related meme stocks, if you will, is sort of this perfect storm of the gamification of investing paired with, a world that had been so thoroughly de-risked. I think people want to take a little risk, and we're all stuck in our houses washing our hands 10 times a day. And I think that propensity to take risk is going to manifest itself some way. So people are lonely, their lives have been de-risked, gaming has been, investing has been gamified, and people are lonely and looking for groups, looking to be part of a movement. And I think that's what Wall Street Bets, is and was, or at least what it felt like to a lot of people, is being part of something bigger. And so it's going to be fascinating to see how this continues to play out in the years to come.
Yeah, you brought up an interesting thought that I hadn't really spent much time thinking about, but the kind of risk aspect of everything else, you've kind of lost any ability to take on, risks and things like that. And then so people might be searching for it. I mean, is there kind of research around that, or is that, kind of tying different philosophies together? Like, where does, or are you just kind of seeing that in behavior?
Yeah, I think, so one thing we know about risk taking is that it is domain specific, right? Um, like I'm never going to go bungee jumping, but I would like invest aggressively. Those things, the way you drive, I think we saw like early on some RTQs would do stuff like, do you obey the speed limit? And like, that's a different animal. But I think what you saw here is, again, like so many people had lost money, so many people had lost their jobs, all this sort of latent, a latent propensity to take financial risk was there. And we know that people kind of double down and become risk taking when they've had a loss. And so I think you see a lot of that. And, the other thing is it's sort of a house money effect. The stimulus checks and the different forms of stimulus, they don't feel like real money. We know that people spend gambling winnings or bonuses differently than they spend, money that's like W-2 employment money. And so I think that's the other thing. I think that people are accounting for and spending their stimulus money differently than they are the money from their jobs. And they're taking risk with that money more freely.
Yeah, I love the data or research around like how you spend different types of money, which is some of the mental accounting research and bucketing theory, which is right. You see people win gambling, and what do? They go spend it on meals and clothing and things like that for themselves. But when it's earned money, much less likely to spend it on that, or even tax refunds. I know they've looked at that too. And where do people spend that? And so I guess we'll probably see some really interesting things on that coming out of the pandemic, being that we gave all this different money kind of without a whole lot of restrictions, right? Like you could have seen much more like, we're going to send X amount to be used for these things, but we didn't, right? A lot of it was just kind of, as you said, like it was just kind of a tax rebate check. Here you go, spend it as you wish. And it did seem like savings went up, which is nice, but it is interesting to say, like, how do people treat if they think, oh, I've got $2,000 and this 2,000 was quote unquote just from the government for free. Do you think that they could carry that for a little bit of time too, especially if they didn't spend it? Like, could that create like a $2,000 like in their mind amount of money in their checking account or bank account for a year from now that they might still say, well, I did get that 2000 for free essentially, so I could spend it however I want.
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. The way that we acquire money impacts, and the way that we mentally account for it or label it, it impacts the way that we're going to spend it. So I don't mean to overstate this. I think a lot of people got these checks and went out and bought milk and bread and eggs. Like, I mean, I think a lot of people are hurting so badly that these checks went to absolute essentials. There's some people though who got the checks who are not as in as dire straits as the other folks. And I think for those people, it feels a little bit more like house money. And so they're more willing to bet it on a risky stock or to take a concentrated risk. So I think it's, your mileage may vary. I'm sure there was a lot of really, I'm sure a lot of groceries got bought. But I'm equally sure that I think a lot of that probably went into the stock market.
Yeah, well, we probably just got the best one line reference to one of our music things the whole time already. Dire Straits, Money for Nothing. The fantastic song. You got Sting singing in the beginning.
So I was cognizant of the Dire Straits reference, and I almost said no pun intended, but I missed the Money for Nothing follow on. Man,
yeah,
I'm good. I'm better than I knew. So
yeah. See, all that was there. You just you didn't even realize it at the time. So tell us, what are some of the things that you want to kind of see happen in the behavioral finance space and consumer experience, right? We kind of brought up the opposite side, all the stuff you kind of don't want to see. So what is it that, Orion, Buckingham, financial advisors, that whole world can kind of look forward to from a behavioral sense?
So weirdly, I kind of want it to disappear. I mean, I want it to fade into the background, and I want it to become so part and parcel of the study of finance and economics that we fail to differentiate it. I have young kids, and I hope that when my kids go to college, there's no behavioral finance course, because like behavior is just baked into everything they study, because that's the way that markets operate. From a technology standpoint, I want to see less of like, okay, now we're going to do a behavioral thing and more just sort of, more integration, more deep integration, so that the UX and the whole user experience is formulated with an eye to producing and eliciting the best, most customer-centric, customer-friendly behaviors possible. So I hope it becomes so integrated into the fiber of finance that it ceases to be its own standalone thing.
Now, I guess a great question for that is, can we actually achieve that outcome versus maybe similar to what you brought up before, which is, when we gamify and make investing free, we might create a different issue, right? Like, can we balance that actually making the right decisions and driving people towards the right process for the end consumer? Or do we just create a better mousetrap for corporations to produce corporate wealth and returns? Because I think that's been the Reddit group, right, which we talked about, would probably have been pushing on the other side, right? That all of this has just been built against us and has created this, system is against us type feel. And then as we saw Robinhood, right, freeze some trades, people got mad about that. And we've got this constant kind of push and pull going on. So I guess it's a very broad question that I don't know, totally prepared to solve today for us, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I don't think it's any mystery. Like, I think if you sat down to design an app and said, hey, look, we're going to make this seamless. We're going to use social proof. We're going to give away freebies. We're going to have confetti cannons going off. I think none of that was designed. That was all designed for addictiveness, not for user friendliness, right? And so I think at times, what's right for the consumer and what's right for the business are going to be at odds. And I think it's why it's so important that we, teach ethics in our B schools, and that we support and we fund, startups and organizations that are led by ethical people, because, this is going to continue to shake out over the next little while. But, these things have real consequences. I mean, these things have real consequences for the broader market. The market was, I know this won't air for a while, but the market was rattled last week because of what was going on with arguably just one or two sort of free trading apps and a Reddit group. And it's pretty incredible to think that, like, it's that duct taped together, that something that small could shake the largest economy in the world is a little frightening. So I think it's a call for all of us, everyone listening to this, to be thoughtful, to become students of human behavior, and to design businesses and products with an eye to helping people make the best decisions possible.
What do you think's the biggest, mistake or misconception you think that either businesses or the advisor world kind of holds true about behavior today?
Oh, for sure. For sure. It's that knowing and doing are tightly correlated, right? Like, oh, like, I don't do that because I read a book on behavioral finance, or like, I know what overconfidence bias is, so I'm all good. Like, I think notably when you talk about the Nobel Prize winners in our space, right? You talk to the Danny Kahnemans of the world, and they say, this is a guy who's written, arguably the best book around on the topic. He's done, won a Nobel Prize. He did all the foundational research. And when he's asked, does this fundamentally change your behavior? Are you better equipped to mitigate bias than the next person? He basically says no, with the caveat that he knows what he doesn't know. Like, he knows enough to not put himself in bad situations. He knows enough to hire an advisor, to help him with things that he's not expert at. He knows not to put himself in the wrong environment, so to speak. But in terms of like this sort of white knuckle strength of the willpower and triumph of the will over behavioral bias because you read a book, like, I think that's the biggest misunderstanding in the industry.
And, kind of, I guess, tying to that too, is there any risk associated with, or I guess, behavior that everything has some reaction out of it? But sometimes I see, and I know a couple people that immediately come to my mind, that I say kind of stay on the close to the range of a topic. So the finance is a good example where people study it a little bit, they study the markets a little bit, and then they come up with this notion, I guess, that like, oh well, I wouldn't do any of that because I'm very aware of what I'm doing. I'm not chasing those things, but and so I don't need to hire an advisor. I don't need to work with somebody because I've studied this and I'm good. And I think that's an interesting, kind of dynamic. Is there is this sense, I think, from a lot of people, once you learn right enough to be dangerous, do you start thinking that you're exempt from the rules that apply to everyone else, even though you say you know them?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely a danger. I started my PhD program when I was 23, and I was a very dedicated undergraduate student. And when I started my PhD program at 23, I was like, I know pretty much everything there is to know about people. And in the next 4 or 5 years, like, I'll know everything. And I know. And then I left that program befuddled, right? I spent 5 years and, thousands of client hours studying human behavior and interacting, face to face with human behavior, and walked out, with PhD in hand, just like, what is going on? And I think that's true of people who are true experts in their field. As you find, they become very measured. I think they're very measured. They're very tentative in the statements they make. And so I think, one of the things that we know from behavioral finance is that, deep certainty and deep understanding rarely go together. And so if you find yourself being, very, very sure of something, that's almost a sign in and of itself that you're missing something.
And how about confirmation bias? What do you think about with confirmation bias? I had a moment earlier today where I was like, I'm pretty sure that I'm engaging in a little bit of this, which is formed my behavior. I had a piece of plastic that I dealing with the recycling with right now, and I threw it in the trash. I was like, it's okay. I remember reading one thing from one guy in this past year that said, really, recycling is a terrible thing. We're not good at it. Super efficient today. We should just focus on being better at landfill management. I was like, well, that guy said that. It's like totally fine. I don't need to recycle this today.
Yeah.
And I had this, and then I was like, you know what? I really don't believe that. I believe recycling is good, but I just threw this out. It made me feel okay. One piece of information that supported my behavior. And, I was very cognizant. That's a good example of some compromise bias to some degree.
I think the big two when it confirmation bias is we want to feel, above average, sort of, above average, intelligent, looks, whatever you're measuring. And then we want to feel virtuous. And, your recycling thing is an example of feeling virtuous. And so we all do this. Like I've, studied religious people, and religious people, even people who go to the same church or ascribe to the same faith tradition, their religion always looks a little bit different sort of internally in the way that they project it out onto the world. And candidly, it's typically in a way that's self-serving. They emphasize the things that they're good at. They de-emphasize the things that their religion says that they don't love, and they end up feeling virtuous. So this is something we all want to do. We want to feel competent. We want to feel virtuous. I've actually read the same research and had the same conversation about recycling, because you're like, this is fine. Like recycling's inefficient, so I'm 80% recycle it, but the 20%, if it's the can's far away or whatever, you're like, it's not that good anyway.
Yeah. What do you think? This has been kind of a closing question I've used. We might go for a couple more minutes, but in your own life, what's a behavioral piece that you've either tried to modify or that you're very aware of yourself that you need to overcome, that you kind of exhibit maybe in a way that you would like to overcome it or aware of it?
Yeah, impatience. I'm very impatient. That's one thing that I've long been working on. And it's really hard. I mean, behavioral change is very, very hard. And, the other thing is that almost any behavior has strengths and weaknesses. So I feel like my impatience leads me to not fools and to surround myself with smart people and not be easily duped. And like, there's a number of positive sort of outcroppings of sort of my impatience with nonsense, but then it also leads me to be, dismissive of my kids from time to time or something like that. And so, understanding yourself, understanding sort of the situational application of these behaviors, understanding that your impatience might serve you well with a pesky salesperson, but it doesn't serve you well at all when your kid's trying to show you something they worked on. That's an important thing, and understanding that nothing is good or bad, except, as it coincides with a situation.
Yeah, it reminds me of, we did a team building thing one time, and we went through some score testing thing, and I end up on extremes on a lot of stuff. So while some people from the outside might view me as kind of a moderate, I think it's only because my extremes might balance me out a little bit. But I remember the kind of coach or leader that was in there asked me, I was one of the more extreme ranked people. And it was like, well, how does that impact like your career interactions with people? And I was like, I'm pretty sure I just went and found a company that accepts that type of like, always needs to get stuff done, move forward, like not be
Yeah.
as not be as thoughtful about getting everyone on board, but making a decision and moving. And I was like, that's probably why I switched from being in a college where that really frustrated me, that we would sit around and, faculty meetings, we might be voting on something for the fourth time 3 years later. And you're like, wow, are we still discussing this? And like, I think I was probably, somewhere looking for a change from that. And so search for, a changing career that would more align with that.
Yeah.
The other thing here is I have it somewhere behind me. I should have grabbed it. But so tell us a little bit about your book. So we didn't really talk about that, but obviously you wrote a book. It's fairly well liked. And what was the process of writing it, getting it out, all that? Was it really fun and enjoyable?
Yeah, so I've written 2 books, The Laws of Wealth and The Behavioral Investor. These books actually will magically change your behavior, unlike the other books. So definitely go buy them. But the process of writing a book is fantastic for me. Like I love it, because the way that I kind of take it on is I flood my brain with every sort of, everything I can read on the topic. I look for themes. I create like a very structured outline, and then I just literally take it a page at a time. I mean, I do, an outline with 100 sort of sub facets, and then just, 1 or 2 pages at a time, I write a book, and I really, really enjoy it. It's really hard. The pay is garbage, but I really enjoy the process, and it helps me clarify my own thinking. Like I really write books to know what I think on a topic and not kind of fall prey to the overconfidence or knowing enough to be dangerous thing that we talked about earlier. That's really why I write books.
Do you remember anything you went back and reread it and were like, wow, it was really smart, and then you kind of forgot that you wrote it that well?
I honestly, I used to see things like actors would, be like, oh, so and so did a movie, and they would say, did you go see it? And they're like, no, I haven't seen it. By the time I published my books, I don't know that I've ever revisited. I'm so sick of them. By the time they're edited and out in the world, I'm happy to read other people's books. So I've never done that, but maybe it's time.
You're like, maybe it's time. Yeah.
Maybe it's time to reflect on my own genius.
Yeah, find out. Yeah, it happened to me not too long ago. I don't know if to say the genius part, but I was like, I wonder if anyone's ever written on this before. And I started Googling it, and then I found an article, and I actually did talk about it. And I was like, oh, so I've written on it once before.
Who's this Jamie wizard? That's smart.
I don't know if that was my reaction when I read it. I think I read it hoping that I would find somebody else who has now written on it in an actual useful way. So last part here, we've been up about 50 minutes. And so I want to be respectful of your time and everyone listening. Best ways to interact with you, follow you, get the book, all of those, all of those self-promotional things that will change their lives for the better forever.
That's right. So self-promotional stuff, check out The Behavioral Investor and The Laws of Wealth. Those are my books. And I have my own podcast called Standard Deviations, which I'd love for you to have a listen to.
Awesome. And best way to find you on social, etc.?
Yeah, so I'm embarrassingly active on LinkedIn, Daniel Crosby, PhD, and I'm active on Twitter at Daniel Crosby.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Daniel Crosby, Cardigan and all, thanks so much for everything you're doing out there in this profession, the research, the time, energy, the writing. I do hope that maybe you bring back some new songs and a band here, sounds like it's been working back up to it. So maybe we'll see that.
I think you and I need to start a band. I mean, my wife plays bass and you're not as cute as she is, but like we could still talk about our B5 metal band. I think that has potential.
It does have some potential. I think there's some build up demand for it out there. So, well, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate everything you do, and thanks for joining us here on this episode of the Framework Podcast.
Thanks again, Jamie.